Today's all about livestock, meat production, 20 times more land to produce the same calories from meat as from plants. Meat provides 18% of calories, but takes up 83% of our global farmland. Why is meat so much more of a problem than vegetables? Well, it's the 10% rule. Trophic levels. You can see global soy production. The majority of what we're growing is to feed animals. If we could use that product for other things, we would solve world hunger just overnight. The biggest problem with meat is really cattle. So it's beef. One of the ways that we raise beef in the United States is called a feedlot. College Board calls it a concentrated animal feeding operation. Now, the whole point of this is they can raise a whole bunch of cattle faster and cheaper. It's all about money. The problem is you've got animal rights activists who say, oh my gosh, these poor animals are being abused. It's crowded, diseases running rampant. So they have to give them lots of antibiotics, which ends up in our foods, which then makes us resistant to the effectiveness of the antibiotics. They don't feed these grass, they feed them grains, which means we have to use fields to raise the grains to feed the cows. Another big problem we'll come back to next semester is all the poop. There's tons of methane, CH4, global greenhouse gas, worse than carbon dioxide is methane. And the concentrations of methane near feedlots is off the charts. The only positive thing about a feedlot is it's cheaper for the consumer then. They don't have to pass on higher costs. You can see that beef way outpaces chicken in terms of global emissions. And the biggest one is waste, CH4, methane. Chickens have almost none. But beef are such larger animals and produce so much waste. We just had Thanksgiving. How many of you had turkey? All right, the other option would be free range grazing. So instead of putting them in feedlots, we can release them out into fields. You've got advantages here. They're grass fed. You don't need antibiotics because they're spread out. The diseases aren't spreading as rampantly. And then their poop, their manure, becomes the fertilizer. So instead of having a bunch of runoff, it actually helps regrow the grass that they're grazing on. Most beef connoisseurs will actually pay more money to eat grass-fed beef instead of grain-fed. Problems with free range are that you need a whole bunch of land. Because they're not all cramped together in a small space, you got to give them enough land to graze. And of course, the beef then costs more, so you have to have consumer demand. Is the customer willing to pay more for grass-fed beef? Right now, the answer is yes. In the future, maybe not. The big downside here is what's called overgrazing. Exactly what you would think it is. Look at the left compared to the right. Both of them look unhealthy to me, but the left is going through what's called desertification. And that also is exactly what you think it would be. The land becomes like a desert. Of course, soil erosion is your biggest problem here. Runoff. It's not just land animals. Remember, this unit is land and water use. And we have big problems in the oceans and our Great Lakes with overfishing. We're not even talking about the chemicals that bioaccumulate in the fish, but just overfishing in general. We're starting to push some species of fish towards extinction. Biodiversity is decreasing in the oceans, and people who make their living by fishing are less and less able to catch enough to earn living wages. It's the same problem as farms. We've turned fishing into an industry. So there are large companies who can go out and they just drag huge nets and gather up all the fish. It's a tragedy of the commons. So one thing we can do in international waters or defined waters, we can set limits, government imposed limits. We can impose fines and taxes if they go over that. Problem with that is enforcing it. How do we monitor that? How do we catch them? A lot of these big companies, they don't care. They'll just pay the fine. So how many times do we let them do it? Do we have the power to shut them down? Aquaculture, which at first may have seemed like a positive water use. Somebody got the idea that we could put floating cages in the oceans and we could then control the fish populations. We could actually breed fish. Now, just like a feedlot, they started using antibiotics, they started using genetically modified fish. And of course, some were going to escape. And so that has influenced the surrounding ecosystem in terms of invasive species, spreading diseases that the others fish, the native fish aren't immune to. And of course, you've got all the waste that collects down underneath. Fish sewage, and that degrades the ecosystem around. Practice question. The major cause for the decline in worldwide catch of fish since 1990 is, it's not acid rain. It's not the fuel for the boats. Competition from aquaculture. No, because they'd still be catching fish. Overfishing. Yes. We're not getting as much fish today as we used to because there aren't as many fish. Their population is dwindling from overfishing. Which of the following is an unintended environmental, keyword there, unintended environmental consequence of aquaculture? So meeting demand for seafood, well, aquaculture would be good for that. Decreasing prevalence of disease in nearby wild fish. No, disease is going up. Contamination of surrounding water by organic waste. Yes. Those fish in the cages are ruining the local ecosystems. Okay. High initial cost, that's not environmental.